In this tutorial, I want to talk about the matched geometry effect, which is a very nice feature due to advanced animations. And this is a 3-part series. So first I will show you a couple of examples, and you can also download the sample project so you can experiment with all of these different test views. Some of them I will also show you in this tutorial or the other part. In the second part of this tutorial, after we saw some cool animations and where you can find more examples, I will start showing you the basics of this effect. And the match geometry effect is only available for the newer SwiftUI, so for SwiftUI 2. So I have here 4 different views that we can have a look at. So the first example is actually not working properly on the simulator. So that's why if I rotate, you see that the image and the text is in a HStack. If it's in portrait, it's in a VStack. So like this, I can take advantage much better of this space. The thing is now, since I have here 2 different layouts, VStack one time in the VStack and the other one time in the HStack, I want to animate the image going to the new position. This doesn't work in the simulator. That's why I did take a little video from my iPad. So now you see it really moves over there. Probably also have to start in the beginning. Also, now when I rotate the device, I want to make sure that it's, because if it's in portrait, here I have this really long and narrow view, where I want to definitely have it in a VStack. And you saw it was nicely moving over there and smoothly transitioning to the new positions. If you have a look here, I didn't use this effect on the text. That's why it's, probably have to start earlier. Pay attention to the text. You see it's fading in and out. This kind of matched geometry effect is an alternative to transitions, to views coming and going, where they're appearing. And the standard behavior of transitions is fading in and out. So now you have one more alternative to use this. So this is the example we're going to play with today. Then I guess the most popular example is for hero animations. So for example, I have here this grid or this list of items. And if I click on one, I want to animate its coming out. What I actually do is I'm increasing, or I'm changing the frame of my small tile here to become as big as the overlay. And I'm animating this coming out. So I'm actually, you see here also it's not there in the background because I animated it out. I changed the frame of this view. So there's one more example. This is from the Apple documentation from one of the, you can download this. It's the Fruta app. I'm here in the menu, tapping on one. And down here I have this ingredients. And for this they also use the matched geometry effect. So it's going to animate it out. In this case they even did some more advanced things of additionally rotating the text. And they also have here some rotation, transitioning with rotation. So this is quite a nice example. And then I have at the SwiftUI lab, there's actually 2 articles about the matched geometry effect. And this is the second part. So both of them are really good. And you can find a lot more examples there. And here you see this wildlife app. So he has also the link to the GitHub. Maybe I just go back to the position where you saw it. So if you click here on one of them, it's also using this hero effect, hero animation, to bring it out. He also used this to select these items. So you see here, when you tap here, he's animating the selection of moving this element up here in the selected bar. And then of course you can again have the detail view as an overlay again. So it's a quite fancy example, I guess. Similar to what you just saw for picking something, we can also do that. So you can have pickers where you select one item. For example, I have here this list if I tap on one, this blue ball, I'm moving the position or the geometry of this blue selected ball with the match geometry effect. So I'm nicely animating this selection here. Similar for the sliding selection. So if I tap here, the slider moves to the new position and also gets the new frame, so the new size. So it's the same length as the text above. You see this specifically if I move here to the shorter text. Then these matching the geometry, which means matching, I'm copying, what we're actually doing is we are taking the frame of one view and applying the same frame to another view. You see this especially here for this selection of a month. This is an example from the SwiftUI lab tool, but it's great because it really shows the fact that we are copying here the frame of this month view, so of March. Right now my green box has the same frame as this month. If I press on May, we are applying a different frame to this green box and we are matching it now with the May box. So it becomes smaller, it gets the size, we're matching the size and the position. Because you can also only match one of them, but in this case we're matching the whole frame. So it's quite nice to see this matching effect. And then similar to what you just saw from the wildlife example, I have here short implementation with emojis. So here I have a bar with emojis. I already selected two, so if I tap on them, I'm unselecting them and they go back to the original position. So if I tap here, I select multiple of these things. This is also interruptible, so even if they fly, this is because of SwiftUI, I can go back to the original one. So it's quite a, addictive animation. But this is probably a super cool thing to do when you have a shopping app and you have a buy button and some animation fly into the basket. Because it's also nice for the user to see, I actually added this to my basket. So this is another example that we will write together in the one of the next parts. After I hopefully now convinced you that matchedGeometryEffect is something worth to know about, and there's quite a few examples to use this, I will now start showing you this in code. I have here a new project, so we can test all this. And I will start by making a basic example where we can match some frames. Match frame example. So let's say I have here in a VStack to text. I can also leave here this hello world text inside. Selection. And I'm going to here add some padding to make one of them bigger and a border. So you see how big this actually is. Yellow. So now I need to have something to match to, and I'm going to use a colored rectangle. So if I here also add a rectangle with fill color.red. So now this is down here. And I want to have it the same frame. I want to now copy the frame of my Hello World box to my red box. So one thing I need to do when I work with GeometryEffect, with matchedGeometryEffect, is to work with the namespace. So this is a special property wrapper namespace. Private var namespace. So you can give here different names for these ones if you have multiple of them. Then I want to now take the frame, and I need to do some kind of copying here of frames, and I want to take it from my Hello World box. So I add here a matchedGeometryEffect modifier, and it has some more additional input parameters, so I'm just going to use these ones. So the idea is the unique identifier that we can add between one or multiple views. So this is my let geometry ID. This can be a string. So this is my geometry ID. Only when you add this modifier to two views with the same identifier, then it's going to be matching, or it's going to copy the frame or position. The namespace is the one that I created here. Property, this is going to be, we're starting with frame, and I will show you the other later. The anchor we're not going to use, maybe just leaving it with center. And the source, now this is the interesting one. It's a little bit misleading if you see your source. Basically what it means is if source is true, we are copying the frame from this view. So this is the source of the frame we want to apply to something else. And you're only supposed to have one source, because if you have multiple frames that you want to copy and apply to a view, the system is going to be confused. It needs to be one source that you're using. And we're going to apply this to our rectangle. So since in this case, this is not the source, this is where we want to copy and use the frame. So this is definitely false. Again, here we can say position, and I'm going to again use frame. This is the same namespace. And the ID needs to be the same. Geometry ID. Okay, I see one problem. And the reason why it's offsetted is because I used two different properties here. So I'm going to use for both the center. So now I basically put my red box on the same position and with the same size as my yellow one. And the reason why it's on top, it's because of this, when you have a VStack, the one that is, if you have two that are overlaying, the one that comes in this VStack afterwards is higher on top. So we can change this by adding here a Z index. So if this is 1, and I want to make this one lower, the one that should supposed to be below now has the index of 0, which is lower than the hello world. So I just changed the way they are layered on top of each other. And you see my hello world text is now appearing. Now let's have a look at these properties that are in there. And the one that you already saw was the anchor. So this is basically saying how you want to, if you want to fine tune a little bit the position. When I had here leading, I basically say that I'm matching here the origin from my hello world, the center, because I had here, format this a little bit better. So what I said here, I am matching the center of my hello world box with the red box at the leading. So you can also use here top leading. So now it's going to move it here. Now you see it better that it's the center. We can also put it here at the border, at the corner. If from my hello world box by saying here bottom trailing. So now you see I'm really matching this. If you want to not have them exactly the same, but with a little bit of arrangement. So now that we experimented with this anchor, I'm going to change it back to be both centers, which is the default. And we have a look at the next property, which is the properties. So this is frame. And you have, this is in enum, you have 3 different cases. We had frame, position, and size. So let's go for size. For both of my matching geometry reader, I'm saying here, take this size, which means that my red box, the size is now matched to the size of my source, the frame that I wanted to copy and use for something else, which is for my hello world. And if I click here, you see this blue box indicating the size. You can also check this if I add here a border around my red rectangle. I probably have to make this here, just going to add here pink as the color and a width of 2. The space that this red rectangle is taking up is the original one, which is not influenced here by this matching geometry reader. For example, if I add, what I mean is if I would add here more text, you see here this lorem ipsum text, which is on the lower part, but my red rectangle still takes up so much space, so I'm not really shrinking it down. I don't like this effect. Every time you use a rectangle, it's one of these greedy views that tries to expand as much as possible. So I was hoping that the matching geometry reader would change the actual size. What you can do, because if I go back here to frame, it's now moving the visible red part into the hello world box, but my original one still takes up so much space. One thing of working around this is if I add here another VStack, to add it somewhere in the background or in the foreground, because this is not going to expand so much. So background. So now have here my VStack consisting of this two, the hello world and the selection, and I'm adding my red rectangle in the background of these two. I'm just going to add here some padding. If I don't do this, so I'm uncommenting here my geometry effect. My red box is now in the background, but it's only taking up the space of the VStack that already takes up space. So I don't add here more clutter. This is, I guess, one of the problems. You have to be aware where you want to add views that you might want to adjust to other views' positions or match to other views' geometry. So it works very well with the overlay or in the background. So far, I only showed you how we can static changes. So I didn't actually do any animations, and most people would probably use it for animation. So for example, I can add here a button. We have to decide what we can do with this actually. Match red box. So now we have to dynamically change if we want to match this or not. So now we have to think of how we cannot match this anymore. There's two ways of doing this dynamically. There's two things that influence if they are matched or not. One is the ID. So only if these two here are the same, I'm matching this. Or if I actually have a source. So if this is false, then there's no source that can be, no original frame that I can copy to my red box. So if this is false, I'm also not matching. So I'm going to use this. So I start with creating a state property. State private var is matched. This is a bool. And we start with false. So I'm using this here now. If it's matched, then this is the source. And when I press this button, I'm going to toggle this property. So I run this in live preview. And you see every time it changes, it either takes all the space or only the one for my hello world. And it's not animating because I need to actually say that the change happens with an animation. Where I use here this with animation, so explicit animation. When I try this again, now it animates in and out, or matching it or not matching it. If you want to animate this red box now to the selected text, to do this one, we can also do this. I probably should add here a little bit of spacing to not make this so cramped anymore. So I can, for example, add one more match geometry effect to my second box. But in this case, because I said we are not supposed to have a source twice, I'm toggling here between these two. So either it's this box or this box. So I'm here inverting this is match property for my selection. Sorry, I need to add here a fixed size, otherwise it's squeezing this text. So if I press now here in this box, we are basically toggling between these two states, between selecting these two. You could also, that's for example what you could use for a picker. Well, basically we made a picker instead of having the button here. We could also add this with an on tap gesture and saying my is matched is false. You can also do this more elegant. And if I tap on the first one, it's true. So now I don't need to have this button anymore. So if I tap on one of them, and I forgot to use the animation. So. Now if I tap on this text, it's moving there. I can now move this rectangle between these different views. Simply by saying, oh yeah, I use this frame. Is this the source? Yes or no? When you remember the example here with these pickers, it was very similar to what I showed you here with picking the month. We basically did the same, just by using here the source property. If you have more than one, you can use the ID. So in this case, I would add different IDs to these different selections. And I would change here the one ID that I use for the red box or for this green box here. This is an example of pickers. But since this is I wanted to show you actually this example of rotation. how do I move it between these two positions. And this is a new file. Swap view. So again, I need to have here the namespace or namespace. And I need to toggle here between two positions, two states. So again, I use a state property. So we can easier test this. State private var is vertical. This is a bool. This is false. So for example, I have here a VStack. And I need to toggle between these two states. So I'm using here a button. And the action call, I'm just going to toggle my isVertical property. Swap views. If my isVertical is true, I'm using here a VStack. And else I want to use a HStack. So the views that I wanted to add here are the same. So I'm not going to put them here in here. I wanted to have them somewhere else. So this is a var content. This is some view. This is a rectangle and a circle. So now I can use my content. So I'm just going to create here another preview. And probably should not make this vertical private, so that I can see one is vertical and the other one is horizontal. One of them is using now a HStack, a VStack, the first preview, and the other one is a HStack. And I added here this button. So if I run this, you see I can swap between these two. So what I actually wanted to do is make sure that the change here is animated. So you could add here again this animation modifier when I press this button. But now it's using the standard transition animation, which is fade in, fade out. And I want to have this matching geometry transition. So I need to add here this geometry effects to my rectangle. So this is match geometry effect ID. This is the rectangle ID and the namespace. And then another geometry effect to my circle and the namespace. So now if I want to swap, you see them animating, going from one position to the other. And you could now say for the other examples, you use 2 times this matching geometry effect, that this is true. If you see here in my example, I added my content twice, which means that I have here in the VStack one time a rectangle with this geometry reader with this ID, and one time in the HStack, one time a rectangle with this ID rectangle. So the system understands when something is going and coming, so transitions. If you have a pair of one is appearing, the other one is disappearing, that it's supposed to match these two together. So the appearing one appears where the disappearing one is disappearing, where the disappearing was before. So you can now nicely do this, move it from here to here. You already saw here that I started to this kind of alignment of adaptive views. I don't probably want to write here this content VStack is vertical all the time. I would want to have a reusable adaptive view or a conditional stack. So I have one prepared, which you can find in the sample project. So here the initializer has one property saying if it's vertical or horizontal. If this is true, then I'm using here a VStack, another was a HStack. The other properties are just because in here I have a VStack where I might want to change a different alignment, a different spacing. So I'm just keeping these ones. And when I use this to create the same view as you saw in the example, this is the adaptive cat view. So what we want to recreate is this view, where I rotate this, where I rotate my images. So we already have half the job done with this conditional stack view. We just need to put this together again and use the same styling for the animation as the swap view here. So I'm just going to drop in this example 2 images, so we have something to show in our UI. So let's try to rebuild this. I have here a VStack. We're doing this now statically without any adaptation. And then decide where we want to use our conditional stack. This is a VStack with a text display you can see Mini-Me, one of my cats. So then I want to have here next to the text in a HStack my image. So this is a image that I can now drop in for my library. This is this image. Don't know why the image dropping is always really slow. And I might as well also drop in the other image outside my HStack. So let's see how many cats we have. Obviously now I need to resize these two images. So I'm going to do this quickly with resizable and scale to fit. And then I need to do this for the other image. That's why I don't see anything. Dot resizable, scale to fit, clip shape, circle. And this one shouldn't be so big, so I need to add here a frame with a width of 100. So this is already pretty close. Then now I also need to have here this text. So I'm just going to again use this lorem ipsum text between my HStack and my image. The difference is here, I think I had here different footnote. This is a font dot footnote. You might also want to use a scroll view for this text. Okay, and a padding at the outside of my stack. An alignment of leading. So now this is the same layout. The only thing is that this one is rotating and this one is not. So I need to decide when I want to rotate. And you can do this with two different ways. You can use the size classes. So for example, I can access the size class from the environment. This is the... Now you need to know which one to use. Vertical size class var very. This is a user interface size class, optional. So if this can be either regular or compact. So what I want to change, the stack that I need to change is the outside VStack. So that this whole block, including my text here, all of these is on the left next to my image. So this whole thing should be in one block, which means I have to add here another, this has to stay in a VStack. So I have to add here another VStack around my title and my lorem ipsum text. These two blocks here should be now in this adaptive stack. So I can use my conditional stack with these alignments. This is, I'm just going to use the standard one and then decide which alignments I want to use afterwards. Spacing 10, 10, and now 2. I'm going to use this instead of my VStack. So now I said it's always true, it's always a VStack. If I change this to false, let's just have a look. It now puts it next to each other. But I only want to do this depending on what kind of size class I meant. So I'm using this here as an argument, saying if my vertical size class is regular, then I'm going to leave it in the size class. You want to see the different layouts depending on the user interface size class in the preview. You can also do this. So I'm going to create here another preview by pressing on the plus button. And then in the inspector, I'm using a fixed size because I want to see it in the landscape mode. So I'm going to use here some manual values. So it's 800 by 400, which seems about the right dimensions. And this also adapts here directly to the right size class. You can also change this value in the environment. If I set here the vertical size class to compact. And for the other example, I don't really need to do this, but it's nice to see it. I would use the regular one. So now it's just easier to prototype between these two. We have now these two different states that we actually want to, that was the whole point, to animate between. And I haven't done any animation or set up my matchedGeometryEffect. So we're going to do this now, starting with the namespace, property wrapper var namespace. I want to animate for example, this circular image between these two different states. So I can add here after my circular image, after the frame, a matching geometry reader with ID and a namespace. So this is the ID for image and namespace. And actually this is not a good position because then only the image is going to be matched, but the text is using the transition one. So I'm going to move this out here and add it to my HStack. So the whole HStack together, the image and the text, is going to be moved. And then I'm going to add also another matching geometry effect to my image, to my large one. So match geometry effect, this is ID. So this is a different ID because it's between these two images. So this is my large image in namespace. So on the content view, I'm using my adaptive CAD view, this view that we just created, as the main view. So now if I'm in my simulator, I can use them, and you don't see it's swapping really fast. This is because I still didn't use any. I needed to tell that it has to animate the changes. So I'm using here an animation modifier, and you can try different ones. Maybe we try spring. So this is, I'm adding this outside of my VStack, of my conditional stack. So, and now you see it's moving. I can also make this a little, it's not really, my computer sometimes doesn't do the animation smoothly, so it's a little bit rough. I can also here and under simulator debug add a slow animation or make slow down all the animations. So if I rotate now, the animation goes a lot slower, and we can check if it's actually moving from which position to which. I need to run this on this device to have this properly. So I'm just going to unslow this. But you see it's nicely moving in there with this spring effect. I didn't add any animation to the text. So for this I also have to add here a matching geometry effect here. I can also add this outside of this VStack. So I'm just going to move it here and maybe I rename this to text. I actually don't really need this, but so now the whole first stack should be moved. This whole part should be also smoothly transitioned. So the whole thing snaps in there. Now it's a question of this timing curve. Maybe a spring is not the right one. Ease in out is maybe nicer. And you can also give here a duration. Shouldn't make this too slow. So I rotate the device. Yeah, it's a bit easier to see on the device than this. But you see, I have this very nice way of animating changes of my layout. In order to get this animation, we only needed actually 3 lines, which is pretty amazing, or actually 4. So we had to use here our own namespace. We have to add this match geometry effect modifiers to the views that we want to transition by frame. And we have to add here an animation view modifier to tell these views that they should change their state with an animation, with this trimming animation. But it's rather small what we actually have to do to get this started. I used here the vertical size class. This is not going to work for the iPad because on the iPad, in landscape and portrait, this is always regular. But you can also use the geometry reader, like I actually did here already. So if you wrap everything in the geometry reader, instead of this condition of the vertical size class, we can also use the geometry size dot width. This needs to be smaller than the geometry size dot height. So on portrait, my height is greater than my width. So this condition is true, and we are using a VStack. In landscape, my height is smaller than my width. This condition becomes false, and we're using an HStack. So this would also work on the iPad and also in split screen modes. It's still working, and I think this match geometry effect for this use case is quite nice. It's a small little additional animation that gives the transition here between these views a nicer feeling. What makes this match geometry effect a little bit difficult to understand is This example is actually one of the easier ones because we actually only have to add it here once. But in case when we used it for the first example, the thing that makes it a little bit more difficult is to understand this, which is the source. But if you have problems with this, if the source is true, what we're actually doing is we're taking the frame of this view, so this whole view that I'm adding this here to. If I would add the Match Geometry Reader before my padding, for example, I would only take this frame without the padding. So I'm taking the frame and I'm taking this frame if this source is set to true. So this is the source of the frame that we're using for something else. And then wherever I say here it's false and the ID is the same, it means this is where I want to use the frame that I took from somewhere else. So for this view, we are setting this frame depending on this property parameter. So either we set the whole frame or only the size or only the position. So you can choose what kind of matching between different frames you want to do. Only size or position, or add here a little bit more customization, even adding here a little bit of offset or with these anchor points. In the next part, we are going to have a look at the hero animations, because then we will have to rely more on the ID parameter here to make sure that we are matching, because we have to match multiple views with one overlay view and decide which one is now supposed to match to. And then also after that, talking about more of these pickers, of this hero flying, selecting things. Go check the other examples too. If you found this tutorial helpful, give it a like. See you next time. Happy coding.